Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are really getting into something fascinating. We're looking at a history that pretty much dismantles one of the biggest myths out there, the idea that the Olympic Games are somehow separate from politics.
It's the core paradox, isn't it? You have Baron Pierre de Coubertin, the founder, dreaming of this apolitical global festival, peace, harmony, a modern Olympic truce.
Right, this grand vision. But what the sources we've dug into show, quite starkly actually, is that this ideal, it's always been in tension, sometimes explosive tension, with the real world, geopolitics.
Absolutely. From day one, the games became this unavoidable stage. Nationalism, ideology, global power plays. It's all there. We're calling it the inevitable arena.
The inevitable arena. I like that. And a lot of this tension seems to circle back to the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, and its claim of political neutrality.
That's key. Our sources argue pretty strongly that this neutrality, it was never really neutral. It was in itself a political choice, one that tended to favor, the existing global power structures, status quo.
Okay, so claiming neutrality was actually a way of siding with the powers that be. Why do that? Did it maybe, I don't know, help keep the games afloat during messy times like the Cold War?
It probably helped stabilize the organization, yes. But it did so by defining what counted as politics. Think about the early 20th century. You had Irish athletes forced to compete under the British flag.
Right, and Finnish athletes under Russian flag.
Exactly. That kind of coercion, which just reflected the imperial world order of the time, the IOC didn't label that political interference. It was just reality.
Because it didn't challenge the system.
Precisely. The alarm bells only started ringing for the IOC when that system was challenged, by anti-fascist movements in the 30s or later anti-colonial movements after World War II. Suddenly that was politicizing the games.
So the neutrality claim became a tool, a way to legitimize the existing order and delegitimize dissent.
Fundamentally, yes.
Yeah.
It acted as a powerful institutional shield for the status quo.
Okay. So our mission today is to kind of map out how this all played out, how dissent and political maneuvering have shaped the Olympics over the decades. Our sources give us 4 main categories of political action to track this.
Yeah, we can break them down. First, the one everyone knows.
Mm.
The boycott. A country just says, nope, we're not coming, for political reasons.
Straightforward enough.
Second, the counter boycott. This is either retaliation, you boycotted us, we'll boycott you, or staging a whole alternative competition.
Okay. What's third?
Third is the ban or exclusion. This is when the IOC itself, or maybe the host country, says, you're not invited, usually as a punishment or a moral judgment.
Right. And the last one.
And finally, number 4, the near boycott. This one's interesting. It's about organized threats, pressure movements that really change how the games happen, even if no country actually pulls out in the end. Arguably, as we'll see, it's often been the most effective tool.
Okay, 4 categories: boycott, counter boycott, ban exclusion, and near boycott. That framework should help us unpack this history, moving beyond just who showed up and who didn't.
Exactly. It lets us see the subtler ways political pressure works.
All right, let's dive into those early years. The games are global, but maybe not quite stable yet. We start with St. Louis, 1904. First games outside Europe. Our sources call it a de facto boycott. What does that mean? No one formally withdrew?
That's right. No formal declarations. But it was, a perfect storm of problems. The cost and sheer difficulty of getting across the Atlantic back then was huge. Plus, the games were kind of awkwardly tacked onto the St. Louis World's Fair.
So it didn't feel like the main event.
Exactly. Most European nations, Britain, France, Germany included, just didn't bother. The European press basically dismissed it as this disorganized American sideshow, not serious international sport.
And the participation numbers really bear that out, don't they?
They're stark. You had 651 athletes total, and a whopping 523 of them were American.
Wow.
Yeah, the U.S. team outnumbered everyone else combined, like 4-1. More than half the events were just Americans competing against Americans. It was basically a U.S. national championship billed as an Olympics.
But it wasn't just logistics, right? There was a darker political element too, these anthropology days.
Oh, absolutely. That wasn't just a sideshow. It was deeply political.
Yeah.
Racist, pseudoscientific stuff. They brought indigenous peoples, often from the World's Fair exhibits nearby, and had them compete in Olympic-style events.
Oh,
The whole point was this supposed demonstration of the physical, quote-unquote, superiority of white industrialized athletes. It was awful.
Even Coubertin, the founder, was disgusted. Didn't he call it an outrageous charade?
He did, which shows you right from the start, these games weren't some apolitical bubble. They were soaked in the politics of the time, race, empire, that whole pseudoscientific racism thing.
Okay, fast forward just 4 years to London, 1908. Now nationalism really explodes onto the scene. Not just colonial stuff, but fierce rivalries, especially between Britain and America.
You could feel that tension right away. The opening ceremony set the tone. The American flag bearer, Ralph Rose, refused to dip the U.S. flag to King Edward VII.
Why? Just defiance.
It was apparently a mix of things. Disrespect over how the U.S. flag was displayed, maybe, but also just a very loud statement of Republican pride against the British monarchy. A deliberate snub.
A small act, but loaded with meaning. And that tension just ramped up, right? Leading to that bizarre 400-meter final.
Oh, the 400 meters. Total chaos. An American runner, John Carpenter, finished first. But the British officials immediately disqualified him, said he obstructed the British runner.
Was it obstruction?
Well, under the rules used in the U.S. at the time, what they call the old American track rules, his move, kind of boxing in the British runner, might have been legal. But the Brits, using their rules, called foul and demanded a rerun.
And the Americans.
They were furious, claimed biased officiating. So the other two American finalists, William Robbins and John Taylor, refused to run the re-race in protest.
Leaving
the British runner, Wyndham Halswell, to win gold by running the final 400 meters completely alone.
You can't make this stuff up. An unbelievably clear picture of national pride, just steamrolling sportsmanship.
Absolutely. And you still had those imperial politics simmering too. Irish and Finnish athletes again protested having to compete under British and Russian flags, using the games to push for independence.
Getting international attention for their cause.
Yeah, showed the games were becoming a platform for anti-colonial voices.
Then, of course, World War I changes everything. And the 1920 Antwerp Games mark a major step. The first formal political ban exclusion, a big precedent.
A very clear act of post-war punishment. Antwerp was in Belgium, a country that had suffered terribly in the war. So the organizing committee, with the IOC basically nodding along, just didn't invite the losers.
Central powers.
Right. Germany, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, just left off the guest list. It was the victors imposing collective judgment.
And the new Soviet Union was out too, right? Even though they weren't technically a central power.
They were excluded too. The Western Allies saw the USSR, which had made a separate peace with Germany, as this radical subversive threat, an ideological pariah.
So that decision was huge.
Monumental. It cemented the idea that the Olympics weren't some independent entity above politics. They were a political club, and membership was a privilege the dominant powers could grant or deny.
Which brings us inevitably to 1936, Berlin. Probably the biggest political firestorm of that era. Germany got the games back in 31, Weimar Republic times. By 33, Hitler's in power, Nazi policies rolling out, anti-Semitism, racism. This sparked a massive global movement for a near boycott.
The pressure was intense. Huge calls for withdrawal, especially in the U.S., Britain, France. People were arguing forcefully, like Jeremiah Money in the U.S., head of the Amateur Athletic Union, that going to Berlin meant, quote, giving American moral and financial support to the Nazi regime, a betrayal of Olympic ideals.
A powerful moral argument, but the boycott failed. Why? The institutional powers blocked it.
Largely, yes. And this is where Avery Brundage, who was president of the American Olympic Committee then, played a really key and deeply controversial role.
He fought the boycott.
He was the face of the opposition. His line was the absolute separation of sports and politics. He even went on this sham inspection trip to Germany, came back, and claimed, totally falsely, that Jewish athletes were being treated fairly.
Despite all evidence to the contrary.
Right. And he smeared the boycott movement itself, calling it a Jewish-led conspiracy. It was ugly stuff, using anti-Semitism to provide political cover for those who didn't want to withdraw.
But there was also a really difficult dimension for African-American athletes, wasn't there?
Hugely complex. They were obviously targets of Nazi racism, but many pointed out the massive hypocrisy. Protesting racism in Germany, while facing Jim Crow segregation and systemic racism every single day back home in the U.S.
So for some, competing was its own form of defiance against American racism.
For many, yes. A chance to achieve something on the world stage, despite the oppression they faced domestically. So ultimately, Brunge's arguments, the institutional inertia, the appeal of competition itself, it won out. The U.S. boycott vote failed, narrowly.
And the result?
49 nations went to Berlin. The most ever, up to that point. It handed Hitler this enormous propaganda victory, made Nazi Germany look modern, acceptable, temporarily hiding the brutal reality.
A major failure for the anti-fascist movement, but they did try to organize an alternative, right? A counter boycott.
They did. The People's Olympiad, planned for Barcelona, Spain. It was meant to be explicitly anti-fascist, non-racist, a real alternative.
What happened to it?
Thousands of athletes were actually arriving in Barcelona in July 1936. Americans, Brits, French, ready to compete. But then, literally as it was about to start, the Spanish Civil War broke out.
Horrific timing.
Just devastating. The event was violently canceled. So you had the failure to boycott Berlin and the failure of the counter event, a double blow.
Okay, moving past World War II, London hosts in 1948 the Austerity Games, and that political judgment we saw in 1920 comes back.
The president's stuck. Post-war punishment again. Germany and Japan, the main Axis aggressors, got a formal ban exclusion. No invitation.
But not Italy. They were Axis too.
Yeah. Exactly. Italy, which had switched sides near the end of the war, was allowed back in. That selectivity really highlights the political calculations involved. It wasn't just about wartime roles.
Okay. But the really huge shift, the earthquake that changed the political landscape of the Games forever, was the arrival of the Soviet Union. They sat out 48, just sent observers.
Right. That was a calculated move. Let them scope things out first. Then in 1952, Helsinki, they arrived in full force. State-sponsored, massive delegation. And that right there basically ended Coubertin's dream of individual competition.
How so?
The Olympics instantly became a central front in the Cold War. It was communism versus capitalism played out on the track and in the pool.
The medal count became the scoreboard for ideology.
Precisely. Athletic success wasn't just about the athletes anymore. It was proof your system was superior. This defined the Games for decades. High stakes, intense pressure.
And the results of this new Cold War dynamic showed up almost immediately. Melbourne, 1956. You call this a watershed moment? The first time multiple simultaneous unrelated boycotts hit the same Games.
Yeah, the facade of unity just crumbled. 3 different crises blew up at once. First, the Suez Crisis. Egypt, Iraq, and Lebanon pulled out to protest the invasion of Egypt by Israel, the UK, and France.
A Middle Eastern conflict spilling into the Olympics.
Then, second, and maybe the most emotionally charged, the Hungarian Revolution. The Soviets crushed the uprising just weeks before the Games. In protest, the Netherlands, Spain, and Switzerland withdrew. They were furious. The IOC refused to ban the Soviet Union for its aggression.
And that tension wasn't just diplomatic, right? It got physical.
Oh, famously. The blood-in-the-water water polo match between Hungary and the USSR was incredibly violent. Players punching, kicking, blood literally in the pool. Officials had to stop it early before the crowd rioted. It was raw politics playing out in the water.
Just brutal. And there was a third boycott.
The ongoing two Chinas problem. The People's Republic of China boycotted because the IOC allowed Taiwan, the Republic of China, to compete. So you had Suez, Hungary, China, 3 separate political fires the IOC couldn't put out.
It showed the Games were now hostage to global politics in a way they hadn't been before.
Completely. And alongside the Cold War stuff, another major political force was building, the anti-apartheid movement. This led to a really significant ban exclusion before the 1964 Tokyo Games.
This was the South Africa ban.
Yes, the IOC was under huge international pressure. They told South Africa they had to send a multiracial team. No ifs, ands, or buts. The apartheid government refused.
So the IOC banned them.
They did. And that ban held for almost 30 years until apartheid finally ended.
That's a major turning point, isn't it? The IOC finally taking a sustained stand against state-sponsored racism, a big shift from their earlier neutrality.
A huge shift, a real victory for activists. But 1964 also had another interesting political angle, a counter-boycott. Indonesia and North Korea pulled out.
Why them?
Because the IOC had banned them.
Banned them for what?
For taking part in something called GNEFO, the Games of the New Emerging Forces, in 1963. GNEFO was set up deliberately as an alternative, anti-imperialist games, a direct challenge to the IOC's authority, which the IOC saw as, well, kind of Western-dominated.
So the IOC felt threatened.
Absolutely. They saw GNEFO as undermining their monopoly on international sport. So they sanctioned the countries involved. Indonesia and North Korea then boycotted Tokyo in protest of the sanctions.
It shows the IOC flexing its muscles to maintain control, using eligibility as a weapon.
Exactly. It was a power struggle over who gets to run global sports.
Moving into the late 60s, we see a really important shift. The near boycott, the threat, becomes incredibly effective. Mexico City, 1968 is a key example, showing the growing power of the African nations.
Definitely. The IOC made a hugely controversial decision initially. They invited South Africa back.
Back after the ban.
Yeah, based on this flimsy promise from the apartheid regime to send a token, supposedly mixed-race team. It was widely seen as window dressing.
And the African nations weren't having it.
Not at all. Through the Supreme Council for Sport in Africa, they organized immediately, issued a clear, credible threat. If South Africa comes, we all walk out. A mass near boycott.
And the IOC blinked.
They had to. The thought of the games being gutted, losing dozens of nations, it would have been a disaster, financially and for prestige. So, reluctantly, the IOC reversed course and withdrew South Africa's invitation again.
That's huge. It basically established the African bloc as a major political force within the Olympic movement. They could coordinate and force the IOC's hand on race.
It was a watershed moment for activist power within the Games. And that political victory outside the stadium was almost immediately followed by that unforgettable moment of protest inside it.
Tommy Smith and John Carlos.
The American 200-meter medalists, gold and bronze, on the podium, raising their black-gloved fists in the Black Power salute, a protest against racial injustice back in the United States.
Using the global stage for a domestic message. And Avery Brundage, who is still the IOC president.
He was furious, called it a nasty demonstration against the American flag by Negroes. His words, he ordered them expelled from the Games immediately.
Which just starkly highlighted that tension again. The IOC demands neutrality from athletes, but acts politically itself when challenged.
Precisely. And we should also remember the context in Mexico City itself. Just 10 days before the Games opened, the Mexican government carried out the Tlatelolco massacre, killing hundreds of student protesters. A brutal domestic crackdown that cast a very dark shadow over the whole event.
Right. So the power of that African boycott threat, it gets used again successfully just 4 years later in Munich, 1972, this time over Rhodesia.
Rhodesia, yeah. Ruled by a white minority government, unrecognized internationally, same pattern, the IOC invited them.
And the African nations threatened to walk.
Again, the pressure built right up to the opening ceremony. It was intense.
And the IOC folded again.
They did. Just 4 days before the Games began, they voted, narrowly, 36-31, to kick Rhodesia out. Avery Brundage was retiring after Munich, and he complained bitterly about intolerable political pressures.
He still didn't get it, did he?
Fundamentally failed to see that the pressure was about forcing the IOC to actually live up to its own supposed ideals against racist regimes.
But all the political maneuvering in Munich was tragically overshadowed by something far darker, an act of terror.
Yeah. September 5th, the Palestinian group Black September attacked the Israeli team's quarters in the Olympic Village. They killed 2 Israelis immediately, took 9 others hostage.
Their demands were political.
Explicitly. Release of Palestinian prisoners in Israel, plus some German radicals. What followed was an 18-hour standoff, then that absolutely catastrophic rescue attempt by the West German police at an airfield.
Everyone died.
All 9 remaining hostages, 5 of the terrorists, 1 German police officer, just horrific.
In the Games,
They paused them for 34 hours. First time ever. But then Brundage and the IOC made that deeply controversial decision. The Games must go on.
Controversial is putting it mildly.
For many, it felt incredibly callous. Prioritizing the show over the human tragedy, over the political reality that had just shattered the Games, it proved, in the most brutal way, that the Olympic sanctuary was an illusion. Even mass murder couldn't stop the machine.
Okay, this next period, 76 to 88, this is really the peak era of the big state-led boycott as a political weapon, starting with Montreal in 1976, which had 2 major withdrawals, right?
2 big ones, yeah, and unrelated. The first, and the biggest, was led by 29 African nations. But what was really different here was who they were boycotting.
Not the host, Canada, not a pariah state.
No, they were boycotting New Zealand.
New Zealand. Why on earth New Zealand? That seems like taking the principle way further.
It was a major escalation. Earlier that year, New Zealand's national rugby team, the All Blacks, had toured apartheid South Africa. This was in direct defiance of a UN call for a sporting embargo.
Okay. So the African nations demanded the IOC ban New Zealand from the Olympics.
They did. The IOC refused. Their excuse was, well, rugby isn't an Olympic sport, so it's not our problem.
That seems like a weak argument.
Very weak. So the African bloc walked out. It was a powerful statement. They weren't just targeting South Africa anymore. They were targeting any nation that maintained sporting contact, holding the whole world accountable for enabling apartheid.
A significant expansion of the tactic. What was the second boycott in Montreal?
That old issue again. Taiwan, the Republic of China. Canada, under pressure from Beijing, wouldn't let them compete under the name Republic of China. So Taiwan boycotted. Just showed the ongoing political minefield around recognition.
Then we get to the big one, Moscow, 1980. Pure Cold War showdown, the largest boycott ever.
Directly triggered by the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in late 79. U.S. President Jimmy Carter laid down the law. Get out of Afghanistan or we lead a boycott. The deadline passed, the Soviets stayed.
And the U.S. delivered. Oh, yeah. It was massive. 65 nations ultimately joined the boycott. Huge U.S. allies like West Germany, Canada, Japan, and very significantly, China joined in too.
That must have really hurt the competition level.
Devastated it in some sports. Swimming, track and field especially. Huge gaps.
And for the athletes whose Olympic dreams were just crushed by this, the U.S. put on some alternative event.
A token gesture, really. The Liberty Bell Classic, a track meet in Philadelphia. Some athletes from 29 boycotting countries competed, but it wasn't the Olympics, just couldn't replace it. A counter-boycott event, but small scale.
So if the U.S. led the charge in 80, the Soviet payback in 84 in Los Angeles was pretty much guaranteed, wasn't it? A direct counter-boycott.
Completely inevitable. Tit for tat. The Soviets claimed it was about chauvinistic sentiments and worries about security in L.A. Phony concerns. Nobody bought it.
Just straight retaliation.
Absolutely. USSR pulled out and brought 13 of their Eastern Bloc allies with them. Big sporting powers like East Germany, Bulgaria, Cuba. Only Romania, interestingly, defied Moscow and went to L.A.
And the Soviets didn't just boycott, they staged their own big alternative games, right?
They did, and this is important. The Friendship Games were Druzhba 84. It was a serious multi-sport event spread across 9 socialist countries.
And the results.
This is the kicker. Our sources show that in quite a few events, weightlifting and track, especially the winning marks at the Friendship Games, were actually better than the gold medal results in Los Angeles.
Wow. So LA, while a commercial success, was athletically compromised, incomplete.
Fundamentally, yes. That cycle of boycott and counter-boycott finally started to wind down in 1988 in Seoul, South Korea. North Korea was furious. The games were solely in the South, who they were still technically at war with.
They wanted to co-host.
Yeah. The IOC offered a compromise, let Pyongyang host a few events. North Korea rejected it and called for another boycott.
But this time, the momentum was gone.
Totally gone. Boycott fatigue had set in. Only Cuba, Ethiopia, and Nicaragua joined North Korea. It fizzled. And North Korea even tried terrorism bombing a South Korean passenger plane in 87, but that failed to stop the games too.
What was the big signal from Seoul 88?
The fact that the Soviet Union and China both attended, that showed the Cold War was seriously thawing. It really marked the end of that era of massive, superpower-driven boycotts.
So looking back at that whole tit-for-tat era, what's the verdict? Did these mass boycotts actually work?
The consensus is pretty clear. No. They were blunt instruments. They were disruptive, sure, but ineffective as foreign policy. The 1980 boycott didn't get the Soviets out of Afghanistan. The 84 boycott didn't sink the LA Games financially.
And the main losers?
Overwhelmingly the athletes. Years of training, dreams dashed for political reasons, often far removed from sport. That's what led to the boycott fatigue and a search for different ways to protest.
Okay, so the Cold War ends, we enter a new era. And Barcelona in 1992 feels like a breath of fresh air, right? A moment of unity.
It really did feel like that. A symbol of coming together. Germany was unified. The Baltic states were competing independently. And hugely symbolically, South Africa was welcomed back after 32 years out in the cold.
And that moment with the runners.
Alana Meyer, the white South African, and Durartu Dulu, the black Ethiopian winner, taking that shared victory lap together. Just an iconic image of reconciliation.
Beautiful moment. But the politics didn't vanish, did they? They just shifted focus.
Exactly. Less state versus state, more looking inward at the host nation, scrutinizing domestic issues, local activism, human rights, social justice became the new battlegrounds.
Atlanta 1996 seems like a prime example of this, that whole Olympics out of Cobb movement. What was that about?
It was a powerful near-boycott threat. Cobb County, a suburb set to host volleyball, had passed this really aggressive anti-gay resolution back in 93, basically declared homosexuality incompatible with the community.
And LGBTQ plus groups said the Olympics couldn't partner with that kind of bigotry.
Precisely. They ran a smart campaign targeting not just the Atlanta organizers, but big corporate sponsors headquartered there, like Coca-Cola. Framed it as a moral issue, yes, but also a huge PR problem.
Did it work?
It did. The pressure forced the organizers to move the volleyball venue out of Cobb County. A clear win for local activism, proving it could force change.
And Atlanta had other protests, too.
Oh, yeah. Anti-poverty groups were very vocal about the displacement of homeless and low-income people due to all the Olympic construction and city beautification, highlighting the social costs.
That pattern continued, didn't it? Sydney 2000 became a platform for Indigenous rights in Australia. Athens 2004 was plagued by massive security costs post 9/11, budget overruns that fed into the Greek debt crisis later.
And then Beijing 2008 really solidified this focus on human rights scrutiny. Huge international condemnation of China's record, Tibet, Darfur, political freedoms, led to another major near boycott movement.
Again, no countries actually pulled out, but it dominated the narrative.
Completely. Especially the torch relay. Remember that? It was supposed to be this symbol of global unity, but it turned into this running battleground. Massive protests in London, Paris, San Francisco. It forced the world and the IOC to confront the host's human rights record head on.
More recently, straight-up geopolitics seems to be back in the mix, though sometimes filtered through technical rules. Tokyo 2020, delayed by COVID.
Right. North Korea actually did boycott Tokyo, citing COVID fears. But the bigger story was Russia. Their athletes were banned from competing under the Russian flag because of the massive state-sponsored doping scandal. They had to compete as the Russian Olympic Committee.
So that was a ban exclusion targeting national misconduct, not ideology per se.
Exactly. Which leads us pretty much to the present day. Paris 2024. The Russian invasion of Ukraine just put politics front and center again, didn't it?
Intensely. The IOC landed on that compromise, letting some vetted Russian and Belarusian athletes compete, but only as individual neutral athletes.
Which immediately drew fire. Ukraine and his allies threatened a near boycott, arguing any Russian presence normalized the aggression. And at the same time, because of the Israel-Hamas war, you had pro-Palestinian groups demanding Israel be banned, drawing parallels to the successful South Africa campaign.
It's incredibly complex. And out of all this, a new form of state protest has emerged: the diplomatic boycott.
Yes. This tactic, which the US, UK, Canada, Australia used for the Beijing Winter Olympics in 2022, feels like a direct result of learning from the failures of the 80s boycotts.
How does it work?
Simple, really. Countries protest the host's human rights record by not sending government officials, politicians, dignitaries, royals, but crucially, they still send their athletes.
So it registers disapproval without hurting their own competitors.
Exactly. It's a way to make a political statement, express moral outrage, but acknowledge the athlete's work and avoid the backlash of a full boycott. State power finding a shrewder way to protest.
So after tracing this century-plus history of conflict, boycotts, bans, threats, snubs, what's the bottom line? How effective has all this political action actually been? Did it work?
Well, the picture that emerges is really quite nuanced. It depends entirely on what the goal was. When the aim was big picture foreign policy, trying to stop a war like Afghanistan in 1980, or change a regime like Nazi Germany in 36, or fight the Cold War, those big boycotts, they mostly failed. Blunt instruments didn't achieve the goal and mainly hurt the athletes.
Right. Ineffective for those grand geopolitical aims. But what about political action focused within the Olympic world itself? Specific sporting issues, human rights related to the games?
That's where the story is dramatically different. Political action targeting specific issues inside the Olympic movement has often been remarkably successful.
Like the anti-apartheid campaign.
Absolutely. The sustained pressure from the African bloc, culminating in things like the 1976 boycott targeting New Zealand's ties. That was hugely important in isolating South Africa internationally. Anti-apartheid leaders like Nelson Mandela themselves said that sports isolation was a significant factor in pressuring the regime.
Any other example?
The IOC banning Afghanistan back in 2000 because the Taliban regime forbade women from competing. That specific rights-based ban is credited with pushing other conservative countries to reform their policies and allow greater female participation in sport.
So the inevitable arena, as you called it, it failed as Coubertin's apolitical dreamland.
Utterly failed at that. Yeah. But paradoxically, it's proven to be a surprisingly potent arena for forcing change within the sporting world. That history of political action shows how pressure, often from activists and advocacy groups, can push the Olympic movement, sometimes kicking and screaming, toward its own stated ideals: human dignity, equality, non-discrimination.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. The games didn't achieve political neutrality, but they have become this messy, contested, yet sometimes effective space for advancing specific human rights, causes anti-racism, gender equality. What does that tell us about power dynamics today? Is it maybe less about pure state power now and more about transnational movements using these global platforms? The arena is inevitable, it seems, but maybe the activists are getting better at setting the terms of engagement.
It's a compelling question. Perhaps the fight has just shifted, found a new focus within the arena itself.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.